sounds began. They weren't loud, just faint knocks, almost like the shifting of wood. I glanced into the passenger seat. The man was sitting there. I don't mean I thought I saw him. I mean he was there. By then, panic had fully taken over. I ran down the trail, lungs burning, not daring to look back. A reflection of someone standing between two cubicles, upright, facing me, enough to tell me she knew. She wanted me to know. She was following me. Hey, hello, 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 hello. Welcome to ASMRk. I hope you are doing well as always. Today's video is yet another compilation of scary stories I've taken from Reddit. Let's get straight to the first one. I hope you enjoy. When my father passed away, the house became mine. It wasn't big, just an old two-story farmhouse on the edge of a forgotten road outside of town. I hadn't lived there since I was a teenager. Moving back in as an adult felt strange, like stepping into a memory I hadn't asked to relive. The place had been in the family for decades, and it carried that weight with it. The smell of aged wood, the creak of the staircase, the way the hallways seemed darker than they should be. It all came back the moment I opened the door. Most of the rooms were exactly as I remembered them, but there was one I had almost forgotten. The narrow room at the end of the upstairs hallway. It had always been empty, barely large enough to fit a bed. My father used it for storage. As kids, my sister and I used to dare each other to step inside and close the door, just to see how long we would last. None of us stayed longer than a minute. Now the house was mine, and that room, it felt different. I noticed it the first night, a stillness, an unnatural quiet, as if the air inside was heavier than the rest of the house. I told myself I wouldn't dwell on it, but of course I did. The first week was fine. Long days at work, quiet nights back at the house. I started unpacking boxes, cleaning out the attic, making it livable again. Then the sounds began. They weren't loud, just faint knocks, almost like the shifting of wood. At first, I blamed it on old pipes, like you do. Houses like this made noise, especially after years of neglect. But the sounds, they always came from the same place, the end of the hallway. It wasn't every night, and it wasn't always the same pattern, but it was always there, the faint suggestion of movement inside the empty room. One night, I finally forced myself to check. I opened the door, turned on the light, and stared at the bare walls and empty floorboards. There was nothing. Still, when I shut the door, the unease didn't leave me. It followed me back to my bedroom, pressing down on me, until I fell into a restless sleep. By the second month, the sounds had changed. It wasn't just knocks anymore. Sometimes I'd hear what sounded like soft dragging, like fabric brushing against the floor. Sometimes it was breathing, to notice unless the rest of the house was silent. And then came the shadows. I would be walking upstairs with the hall light on, and I swear I saw movement beneath the door at the end. Just a flicker, like someone shifting their weight inside. I started avoiding the room completely. I kept the door shut at all times, but the less I looked, the worse the feeling got. The air in the house at night felt wrong. I'd catch myself staring at the dark stretch of hallway, waiting for something to step out. It got to the point where I began sleeping on the couch downstairs, anything to avoid being near that door. But one night, around 3 in the morning, I woke to the unmistakable sound of the door upstairs opening. Slow, hinges straining. I didn't go up, I couldn't. I just lay there in the dark, holding my breath, listening to the silence that followed. The night I left for good was in early December. I'd convinced myself I was being ridiculous, that I was letting grief and old memories twist my mind. So I tried to reclaim the space. I turned on every light upstairs and forced myself to walk down the hallway. The door to the room was open, not wide, just a few inches, enough to show me darkness inside. I stood there for what felt like an hour before finally pushing it open. The room was empty, still bare, still small, still nothing more than 4 walls and a window. But in the middle of the floor there was a mark. Not dust, not a stain, a smear, long and dark, dragging from the far wall toward the doorway, like something had been pulled out. That was it. I walked out, shut off the lights, grabbed a bag, and drove away without looking back. I still own the house, I just don't live there. I do wonder if I should sell it, but then I imagine that room. I imagine someone else moving in, someone else lying awake at night, listening to the faint sounds of something that doesn't want to be alone. And maybe it's better if the house just stays empty. I don't know why I'm writing this down. Maybe because I haven't slept properly in weeks. Maybe because the memory keeps replaying in my head like a bad loop. A part of me hopes that if I let it out, it'll stop. This happened earlier this year. It was in late February. I was driving home from visiting my brother in a small town called Ashford. The route back to my place cut through miles of farmland, then thick woods, then a long stretch of highway that seemed endless at night. It was just before midnight when I left. I'd had too much coffee at my brother's place, so I felt fine about the drive. I figured I'd get home around 2 in the morning, no problem. But the farther I drove, the emptier the roads became. There's something about being the only car on a rural highway at night that does strange things to your mind. The road ahead looks infinite, and the glow of your headlights feels like the only thing separating you from a wall of absolute black. And that's when I saw him. It was maybe an hour into the drive, just outside the stretch of woods that borders Ashfield. My high beams caught movement at the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer, but no, it was a man. He was standing just off the shoulder, half in the ditch, half on the gravel. He didn't flag me down, he didn't hold out his thumb, he just stood there. I slowed down instinctively, but something about him made me hesitate. He wasn't dressed for the weather. He had a thin jacket, no hat, no gloves, and it was well below freezing. His head was turned toward the trees, as if he wasn't interested in me at all. I drove past, watching him fade into my rearview mirror. I told myself I wasn't stopping for a hitchhiker in the middle of nowhere. That's how bad things happen. But a mile later, I felt the guilt creep in. What if he did really need help? What if he'd broken down or gotten lost? I checked my mirror again and froze, because he was standing on the shoulder behind me, closer than before. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks. Maybe it was another person, maybe a trick of the lights. But the jacket, the stance, the angle of his head, it was the same man. I didn't stop, I drove faster. 5 minutes later, I rounded a curve and saw him again. Same spot, same posture, standing just beyond the reach of my headlights, waiting. I gripped the wheels so hard, my hands went numb, and I kept driving. Every few miles, he was there, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind me when I checked the mirror. Always the same, always still. I told myself there had to be some explanation. Maybe he was walking, maybe I was circling back without realising. Maybe the road was playing tricks on me. But the sick weight in my stomach told me otherwise. It wasn't possible for him to keep showing up, not like that. I finally hit the main highway after what felt like an eternity. For a while, I thought I'd lost him. No sign of the figure, just the empty stretch of Ashford and the low hum of the engine. I started to relax, told myself it was just exhaustion, my mind playing tricks on me. Then, I glanced into the passenger seat. The man was sitting there. I don't mean I thought I saw him. I mean he was there. Same thin jacket, same head angled slightly away, as if looking at something outside the window. I slammed on the brakes and swerved onto the shoulder. My heart was hammering so hard, I couldn't breathe. I turned to face him, and the seat was empty. No door had opened, no weight had shifted. He was just gone. I sat there for 10 minutes, shaking, headlights cutting through the dark, until I finally forced myself to keep driving. I made it home around 2:30. I locked every door, pulled every curtain shut, and sat in the living room until the sun came up. The rational part of me wants to say I was overtired, strung out on caffeine, and hallucinating. But here's what I can't explain. The passenger seat was damp. Not like spilled water, not like condensation. Damp, as if someone had been sitting there in wet clothes. I haven't driven that road since. My brother keeps asking why I don't visit anymore, and I can't bring myself to tell him. Because what would I even say? That I keep seeing him, still, in the corner of my eye when I drive at night. That every time I pass a figure on the roadside, I feel my chest lock up, waiting for it to turn its head. And that sometimes, when the highway's empty, and I glance at the rearview mirror, I swear I see him sitting in the back seat, watching me from the dark. I've been hiking since I was a kid. My dad raised me on it, and when he passed away, I kept up the habit, partly because I loved it, and partly because it was a way of staying close to him. Last summer, I decided to check out a trail I'd never done before, the one near Miller's Creek. It's not a tourist spot. If you don't live in the county, you wouldn't even know about it. It doesn't even show up on hiking apps. The trailhead started just past an abandoned ranger station, overgrown with ivy, missing most of its windows. Locals said the station had been shut down years ago after funding cuts, but it gave me a strange feeling, standing there alone, staring at a building that once had a purpose, but now sat like a husk on the edge of the woods. The path itself was barely marked. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. The normal sounds, birds, wind moving through branches, just seemed to drop off. It wasn't silence, not really, but something close enough that my footsteps sounded too loud. And then I noticed it, that feeling of being watched. Not the kind you shake off with a laugh, but the kind that gets under your skin and lingers. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just the isolation messing with me. But the further I went, the more I felt that feeling clinging to me. Around an hour in, I came across a natural hollow, a dip in the earth where the trees bent inwards, their branches knitting above to block out the sky. The place smelled damp, almost like wet leaves that had been sitting too long. And that's when I saw it. Across the hollow, maybe 30 feet away, something moved. At first, I thought it was a person. The outline was there, upright, tall, thin. But the longer I looked, the less it fit. Its movements were wrong, too deliberate, too careful, like it wasn't just walking, but mimicking how walking should be. I froze, everything inside of me screaming to turn back. But there was a part of me that was locked, staring. The figure stopped too. For a few seconds, it was just the two of us in the hollow, neither moving. Then, without warning, it crouched low to the ground, almost animal-like, and slipped behind a tree. Surely this wasn't real. Surely I'd imagined it. Shadows, stress, anything but what it really looked like. I turned back toward the trail, forcing myself to keep a steady pace. But about 10 minutes later, I heard it. The sound of leaves shifting, branches creaking. Not behind me, but to the side, moving parallel to where I walked. Whatever it was keeping pace. I sped up, the sound sped up. I stopped, the sound stopped. It wasn't a deer or a bear. I've been around wildlife enough to know the rhythm of an animal's movement. This wasn't that. It was something that was trying to move like me. Eventually, I broke into a jog. The trail felt endless, winding and twisting through the trees. The sound stayed with me the whole way, sometimes too close, sometimes fading just enough to make me wonder if it was gone. And then I caught it again, just ahead this time, cutting across the trail. The same tall, thin outline. It didn't run, it didn't hide. It just stood there, watching. By then, panic had fully taken over. I ran down the trail, lungs burning, not daring to look back. forest seemed to stretch on forever until finally I saw the break in the trees where the ranger station sat. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, slamming the door shut, locking it, my chest heaving. When I looked back towards the tree line, I swear I saw it, just at the edge, standing perfectly still. The same upright figure, too tall, too thin, his face hidden by shadow. It didn't move toward me, it didn't need to. It just stood there as if it wanted me to know I hadn't imagined it myself. I haven't gone back to Miller's Creek since, but sometimes when I'm hiking elsewhere, I still get that feeling, like something out there is practicing, waiting, learning how to follow. I work for a mid-sized insurance company in the city. Nothing glamorous, cubicles, buzzing fluorescent lights, coffee that tastes like it's been filtered through cardboard. Most people are out the door by 5:15, but during the audit cycle, some of us end up staying late to get the reports in order. That's how I found myself in the office at 8:30 one night. The whole floor was empty, except for me and the dull hum of machines still running. The HVAC, the ice maker in the break room, the occasional clunk of the printer warming itself, even though no one had sent a job. The thing about offices after hours is how unnatural they feel. Spaces meant for constant noise, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, people muttering to themselves. Suddenly, stripped down to silence. My footsteps seemed to echo, even though the floor was carpeted. I had to print off 2 binders worth of claims history, which meant I was stuck babysitting the industrial copier in the far corner of the office. The room had no windows, just 4 beige walls, and that massive machine that never seemed to rest. I loaded the papers, pressed start, and leaned against the doorway, scrolling my phone to pass time. That's when I noticed it, out the corner of my eye, a figure moving between the cubicles. I froze, my fingers still hovering above my screen. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of the copier light flickering against the glass partitions. But then I saw it again, a shadow slipping across the aisle, as if someone was cutting between desks. Hello, I called out, louder than I intended. My voice bounced strangely off the walls. No answer. I told myself it had to be one of the cleaning staff. They usually came in after 9, but maybe someone was early. I stepped out of the copy room and looked down the aisle. Nothing. Just rows of empty chairs and darkened computer monitors. The copier whirled behind me, spitting out pages in steady bursts. And then, faintly, I heard something else. The soft rustle of fabric, like someone shifting just out of sight. I walked back toward the copier, heart thudding now. That's when I saw it. Through the glass partition on the opposite side of the room, a reflection of someone standing between 2 cubicles, upright, facing me. But when I turned my head to look directly, nothing there. By now I was rattled. I thought about packing up and finishing the binders in the morning, but I convinced myself I was just being jumpy. Stress, bad lighting, an empty office playing tricks. The copier finished the first stack, and I reached to reload it with more paper. As I bent down, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. One of the bottom drawers of the copier, the kind was slightly open, just enough to notice. I hadn't touched it. No one had, as far as I knew. I crouched down, hesitating, then pulled it open. Empty. Nothing inside but dust and old toner residue. But when I stood back up, there was a piece of paper waiting on the output tray. The copier wasn't running. I hadn't sent another job, but there it was. A single sheet with no header, no footer, just one line in faint black type. I see you. The room all of a sudden felt smaller, the air heavier. I dropped the paper, grabbed my bag, and backed toward the doorway. That's when I heard it again. The sound of movement. Only this time, it wasn't coming from inside the copy room. I didn't look. I couldn't. I ran down the aisle, past the cubicles, past the break room, toward the elevators. My footsteps were too loud, echoing in the empty space. But underneath them, I swear there was something else. Steps that weren't mine, following, just out of sync. The elevator took forever to arrive. I kept glancing back, expecting to see someone or something coming down the corridor, but it was always empty. Finally, the doors opened, and I nearly fell inside. I punched the ground floor button and kept my eyes on the crack between the doors as they slid shut. Just before they closed completely, I saw it again. A shape at the far end of the hall, tall, still, watching me. I didn't go back in the next day. I called in sick. When I finally returned, everything was normal. No strange papers, no open drawers, no shadows between cubicles. But sometimes when I'm working late and the floor is quiet, the copy will start on its own, spitting out a single blank page. And when I pick it up, I always check both sides, half expecting to see words, faintly, bleeding through. I don't usually take long road trips alone, but last summer I had to drive across 3 states for a job interview. It would have been cheaper to fly, sure, but I thought I'd get to see some of the country whilst I was driving. My car isn't great, but it's reliable, and I figured 2 days of driving couldn't be that bad. It was the kind of drive that chews up hours in silence. Gas stations that look like they haven't been renovated since the 70s. Long stretches of cracked highway where the radio fuzzes out and your phone sits on no service. About halfway through the first day, I stopped at a rest area. Just one of those roadside pull-offs with vending machines and bathrooms that reek of disinfectant. I bought a Coke, stretched my legs, and was about to get back on the road when I noticed her. She was sitting on the hood of a dark green sedan, maybe 2 cars down from mine. Early 40s, I guessed. Thin and pale. Her hair was long and stringy, the colour of dirty straw. She was staring, not at her phone, not at the vending machines, but directly at me. I got in my car quickly and told myself I was just being paranoid. People look, it happens. But when I pulled out, so did she. Her sedan merged right behind me onto the highway, like she'd been waiting. At first, I shrugged it off. Highways funnel people the same direction for hours. Of course, we'd end up on the same stretch. But as the miles ticked by, the back of my neck prickled. Every time I checked my mirror, there she was. Same car, same 2-car length difference. I tried changing lanes, she changed lanes. I sped up, gas a couple of hours later, I was sweating. My stomach was tight, my hands shaking when I bumped the tank. I told myself again it was nothing. Coincidence. Maybe she was going the same way. But when I walked into the gas station store to grab snacks, I caught sight of her through the glass. She hadn't got out of a car. She was sitting in the driver's seat of the green sedan, head turned, eyes locked on me. I bought my stuff, heart pounding, and got back in my car. The second I turned the ignition, she did the same. When I pulled back onto the highway, her headlights slid in behind me, like they belonged there. It was getting dark by then. My GPS told me I had about 3 more hours to get to the cheap motel I'd booked for the night. My brain was exhausted from driving, but every time I checked my mirror, I saw her. Always steady, always there. I tried telling myself it was nothing sinister, just a coincidence. But coincidence doesn't tell you through 2 different exits, 3 fuel stops, and nearly 6 hours of driving. The worst part was when I thought I'd lost her. I took an unmarked turn off onto a back road, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I drove fast, tyres biting into the gravel, praying I'd lose her in the twists of the wooded road. For 5 glorious minutes there was nothing behind me, just darkness, no headlights, no car. Then they appeared again, a faint pair of beams in the mirror, the same shape, the same green sedan. She hadn't just found me, she'd waited. And when she finally drew close enough for me to see her face illuminated in the passing glow of the street lamps, she was smiling. Not a broad, theatrical grin, just a faint curve at the corners of her mouth. Enough to tell me she knew. She wanted me to know. She was following me. By the time I reached the motel, I was unravelling. My chest was tight, my scalp prickling with sweat. The place was the kind of roadside inn you'd book online and regret instantly. Faded sign, empty parking lot, a front desk clerk who looked half asleep. I thought about keeping on driving, but I couldn't. My eyes felt like sandpaper. My body was buzzing with exhaustion. I pulled into a spot, shut the car off, and waited. Her sedan pulled in 3 spaces over. I didn't move, she didn't either. We sat there in silence, engines ticking as they cooled. I could see her profile in the dim glow of her dashboard lights. She wasn't on a phone, she wasn't gathering her things, she was just sitting there, watching. I forced myself to grab my bag and stumble to the office. I checked in. The whole time, I could feel her eyes on me through the glass door. When I got to my room, I shoved a chair under the doorknob and pulled the curtains tight. For hours, I lay there in the dark, every muscle tense, staring at the thin strip of light under the curtain. At some point in the night, I worked up the courage to peek outside. Her car was still there, parked in the same spot, engine off, windows dark, but the driver's seat was empty. So that is the last story for today. I hope you enjoyed. If there are any stories on Reddit that you would like me to read, please do leave them in the comments. I will gather a list, and once there's enough, I'll get them recorded and put into a video. Until next time, take care.